On my front porch, coffee mug providing warmth, I gazed at the small plot transformed into a stunning sanctuary over years. My garden was my solace, a tranquil piece of the world amidst the chaos following the divorce with Clarissa. The messy breakup had been filled with disputes, tears, and her departure, carrying half my life in her luggage. Yet, I found serenity here in this peaceful Illinois suburb, only accompanied by my blossoms. Roses, tulips, daisies, all flourishing under my guidance, a self-built fence protecting them. It was modest, but it belonged to me. That calmness persisted until the day I spotted a moving truck at a nearby house. Initially, I thought they were just new neighbors seeking a tranquil existence like mine. However, upon seeing her step out of the passenger's side with a haughty toss of her hair, I recognized Clarissa, my former spouse. My heart plummeted. Into my secluded street moved a newcomer, seemingly a cosmic prank. Then arrived Rick, an unfamiliar face, towering figure with broad shoulders, clipped haircut, exuding an air of command. His vehicle was a noisy, oversized beast, adorned with chrome, the kind one associates with someone seeking attention. They began unloading their belongings, and I secretly hoped they would keep to themselves. However, hope is elusive. It seldom lasts when reality strikes back. A few days later, while tending to my roses, the booming engine of his truck pierced the silence. I looked up just in time to see him skid out of their driveway, recklessly cutting a corner and careening onto my lawn, leaving deep furrows in the grass that I had spent months meticulously grooming. I stood there, hose dripping, jaw clenched. It wasn't yet the roses destroyed, just the lawn ravaged, but it felt like a portent of things to come. The following weekend, the same incident occurred, followed by another the week after that. Every time, he recklessly swerved his truck, leaving tire tracks that resembled scars in my yard. I gritted my teeth and mended the damage, telling myself it wasn't worth an argument. However, one Saturday morning found me kneeling in the dirt, planting new marigolds, when I heard the familiar rumble. Before I could even rise, Rick's truck plowed through my garden. The front tires squashed my roses, while the back ones flattened the tulips. Petals scattered everywhere, stems snapped like bones. My heart raced, my fist clenched. He didn't slow down, just kept going, his laughter echoing from the open windows, as if it were some amusing game. I glanced at their house and saw Clarissa on the porch, sipping something, smirking at me, a familiar expression when she knew she'd won an argument. I could take it no longer. With dirt still on my knees, I strode across the street and halted at the edge of their driveway. "Hey," I said gruffly, my voice edged with fury. Rick emerged from his vehicle, exuding arrogance, casually wiping his hands on his denims as if he'd accomplished something significant. Clarissa remained where she was, observing me with an air of self-satisfaction. "Could you please park your truck elsewhere?" I attempted to maintain a level tone. Rick merely grinned, revealing too many teeth. "What's the problem? It's just some flowers." My blood pressure spiked. "These are my garden. I've nurtured it for years. You can't drive through it carelessly." He erupted in a boisterous laugh, mocking me. Turning to Clarissa, he sneered, as if regarding me as a joke. At last, she spoke, her words tainted with the same venom I remembered. "Oh, Marcus, relax. Men are men. Rick's a real man, unlike some others." Standing there, I fixed my gaze on her, feeling that familiar burn. A real man, she had flung at me during our divorce, implying I was less because I didn't behave in a certain manner. Rick slapped his truck, continuing to laugh. "Perhaps you need a more robust hobby, friend. Flowers, adorable." I remained silent, simply turning and walking back to my home, my jaw clenched so tightly it was painful. Their laughter echoed behind me, cutting deeper than I cared to acknowledge. Upon entering my house, I slammed the door against it and leaned on it, panting heavily. My garden, what remained of it, lay in ruins. Scattered petals, shattered stems, tire tracks weaving destructively through it like a scar. For years, I had cultivated that small corner of tranquility, and in one morning, they had demolished it. I glanced out the window at their house, at that obnoxious truck parked as if it ruled the street, and within me stirred a change. This wasn't merely about flowers anymore. This was personal. They sought to provoke. Very well, I would respond in kind. Not with shouts or fists. I wasn't like Rick. I would retaliate my way. I didn't know how yet, but standing there, gazing at the devastation of my haven, I knew one undeniable truth. Every weekend after that point, a ball of anxiety knotted within me, anticipating the sound of Rick's truck. Waking up Saturdays became an unwanted ritual as I sat on the porch sipping coffee, feigning normalcy while my eyes continually surveyed their house 3 doors away. As if on cue, his engine would growl, boisterous and disruptive, and there he'd go screeching out of their driveway, making a wide turn and tearing through my yard once more. The early incidents merely involved damaged grass, but now he deliberately targeted the garden. His tires devoured whatever remained of my flowers, leaving mud and broken stems in his path. I stood frozen, clutching my mug so hard it felt like it could shatter, watching him speed away down the street, as if he believed he owned the entire neighborhood. Always by his side, Clarissa sat on their porch with a drink in hand, seemingly enjoying the spectacle as if it were her favorite television program. Occasionally, she would flash a smirk at me, hinting as if challenging me to respond. Another attempt was made to speak with them. Perhaps I could reason with him, I thought, though it was silly. One day, after he had crushed my daisies, I approached them, keeping my hands tucked away in my pockets to avoid any impulsive actions like striking him. Rick leaned casually against his truck, cleaning the hood as if it were a prized horse. Clarissa sat on the steps, swirling ice cubes in her glass. "Hey," I began, maintaining a steady tone. "I'm asking you again, please keep that vehicle off my yard. It's not a racetrack." Rick continued to clean without glancing up. "It's just harmless fun, man. Lighten up. Fun." That word stung. "It's not fun for me," I said. "That garden is mine." I emphasized my words. "You are destroying it unnecessarily." Finally, he stood up, towering over me with a smug grin. "It's just dirt and petals, Marcus. It's insignificant. If you had something truly valuable, perhaps I'd take notice." The color rose in my cheeks, but before I could retort, Clarissa interjected. "He's attempting to prove his masculinity," she said, as if it were the most self-evident fact. "He wouldn't comprehend. Proving his masculinity." I wished to laugh, but all I felt was the simmering rage welling up within me. Once more, I retreated, their laughter driving me back to my home. Each time I tried to assert myself, they turned it into a jest. I endeavored to mend the garden as best as possible, salvaging what I could, filling in the potholes, but nothing seemed right. The organized rows were missing, the fence was listing, and every repair felt like a band-aid on a fractured limb. I was avoiding my own front yard, lest I have to confront the destruction. But I couldn't escape the noise. Every weekend, that truck. Every weekend, their derisive voices. Rick shouted various phrases as he passed by: "Nice weeds," "Buddy," "Grow a pair," "Flower boy," and Clarissa laughed hysterically, finding it the most amusing thing she'd ever heard. I would lie awake at night, pondering over these events in my mind. It wasn't just the garden that bothered me. It was the disdainful glances from Clarissa, as if I had always been insignificant to her. The fateful day arrived when I broke down. I had worked late into the night on a new garden section, hoping to breathe life back into it. I meticulously reconstructed the wooden fence by hand, taking pride in each nail driven. Exhausted but hopeful, I retired for the night. Waking up the next morning, I shuffled outside with my coffee, anticipating to see my work still standing. Instead, I stood motionless. The garden had not been damaged, it had been obliterated. Each plant was torn out or stomped flat, and the fence I'd spent hours repairing lay in ruins, kicked in and scattered everywhere. Deep tread marks marked the center, and the lingering scent of exhaust filled the air, making it seem like a battlefield, as if some beast had rampaged through it to torment me. I accidentally knocked over my mug, spilling coffee onto my boots, and stood there motionless, heart constricted, hands trembling. There was no need for speculation about who was responsible. The sound of Rick's truck idling down the street confirmed my suspicions, and as I looked up, he appeared at the window with his usual foolish grin. "Oops," he called out, then accelerated and drove away. Clarissa was on the porch once more, laughing heartily enough to almost spill her drink. I remained stationary for a considerable period, simply gazing at the wreckage, now my wreckage. The final remnant of what I had, the sole thing I'd held on to after she abandoned me, had vanished. It wasn't merely dirt and petals to me. It was every peaceful morning I'd spent there, every effort I'd invested in transforming the chaos she left into something beautiful, and they had taken it away simply because they could. Returned inside, slammed shut the door, collapsed into a chair as thoughts whirled. I was done pleading, shouting, or attempting to reason. Their game was over. They presumed they could tread on me without consequences. They believed I'd endure like in the past with her. But this time was different. I hadn't decided my course of action yet. Yet, as I gazed at my soiled boots, a flame ignited within me. It wasn't about petals any longer. It was about them thinking they could shatter me and revel in the process. I may not be broken yet, and I wouldn't let them triumph. I'd find a means to make them rue their actions. I would ensure it. I couldn't rest that night after they wrecked my garden. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the devastation, the trampled flowers, the shattered fence, tire tracks slicing through it all like a blade. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, consumed by anger and an edge of defiance. This time, I wouldn't merely fix the issue. I wouldn't allow Rick and Clarissa to continue mocking me as if I were their plaything. By the break of dawn, I had made up my mind. A strategy was needed, a clever one that would hurt them without any physical confrontation from my side. Although I lacked Rick's physique and Clarissa's toxicity, I possessed intellect, and I intended to employ it. I seized my phone and navigated through contacts until I found Kel Benton's name. If anyone could assist in executing this, it was him. Kel was an old acquaintance from the past, before Clarissa, before the divorce, when life seemed more straightforward. He now dwelled in rural areas, a farmer adept at inventing. Over the years, he had created numerous peculiar devices, tools for his crops, deterrents for crows, even a toy robot dog once, just for amusement. For some time, I hadn't spoken to him, but he was indebted to me due to an incident years ago when I helped him transport hay after his vehicle broke down. I dialed his number, nervously pacing my kitchen as the wrecked garden outside taunted me through the window. "Marcus Shaw, the old rogue," Kel answered, his voice gravelly yet cheerful. "What's causing you to call me at this ungodly hour?" I didn't beat around the bush. "I need your assistance, Kel. My ex-wife's new husband has been ruining my yard, and I've had enough. I want to set up a deterrent. Something to make him stop instantly." After a brief silence, he chuckled softly. "It sounds like a man has overstepped," he said. "Tell me your plan." I explained the situation, detailing how Rick was driving through my garden, how Clarissa encouraged him, and how they had destroyed everything I had worked to build. Listening intently, Kel grunted occasionally, and when I finished speaking, he didn't hesitate. "I have a solution," he said. "Have you ever heard of a perimeter mat? Marcus used M for keeping cows from straying. The voltage is harmless, but it will make M regret their decision to leave home. I can adjust one for you." My ears pricked up. "What else do you have?" he chuckled. "How about motion-activated sprinklers? A sudden burst of freezing cold water, soaking M when they step in the wrong place. And guess what? You'll adore this, a motion-activated speaker. I designed one with a sound that would terrify even the devil. Part demonic, part hellhound, incredibly loud, it would make them believe the gates of hell had opened." A grin spread across my face. "This is perfect for M, Kel. Can you deliver it promptly? Give me a day to gather everything." He replied, "I'll bring it tomorrow. You owe me a beer after this, though." "Agreed," I said, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The following afternoon, Kel arrived with his worn-out truck, its engine rumbling into my driveway. He stepped out, lean and sunburned, carrying a box of equipment that jingled and clattered. "Here's your revenge kit," he said, setting it down with a thud. He explained its components to me. The mat was a slim, rubbery item I concealed beneath soil layers, connected to a compact battery pack. The sprinklers were miniature but resilient, suitable for concealing within flower beds. Moreover, The speaker was linked to his phone, broadcasting the ominous sound for me. It was a low, growling noise, reminiscent of a terrifying dream, loud enough to awaken the entire neighborhood. "They'll defecate themselves," Kel remarked, grinning. I visualized Rick's smug countenance transforming into fear. "I hope so." We spent the remainder of the day arranging it. I excavated shallow furrows along my property boundary, placed the mat there, and concealed it with earth to appear unremarkable. The sprinklers were installed next, hidden amid what remained of my plants, directed straight at the path Rick regularly used. The speaker was tucked under the porch, adjusted so the sound would emanate toward the street. Kel wired everything to motion detectors, step on the mat, and the entire performance would commence. I added one more component, my old security cameras. Previously purchased at a low price, primarily as a security measure against package thieves, they had now become my eyes. One was installed on the porch, another by the garage, both trained on the yard. If Rick attempted anything, I would have evidence. With the conclusion of our work, the sun began to set, and my humble abode appeared normal once more, albeit secretly transformed into a trap, biding its time to spring. Kel patted me on the shoulder. "You're quite patient, Marcus, but even the most patient men have their limits. This will teach him." I thanked him, offered him a cold beer from the fridge, and sent him off. Then I ventured inside, filled a mug with fresh coffee, and took a seat by the window. It was night time, the street hushed, but I chose to remain awake, eager for Rick's next move. I knew he would come. Weekends were his prime time, and the lure of causing further damage to my yard would be irresistible, especially after the destruction he had already wrought. I sat there, sipping my coffee, the bitterness mirroring the burning anger within me. Every sound within the house, every noise outside, left me tense. I visualized it, his truck arriving, the tires crunching gravel, the turmoil that ensued. I wasn't a violent individual, never had been, but this wasn't about violence. This was about reclaiming what was mine, about demonstrating that I wasn't the feeble man they perceived me to be. My garden was destroyed, true, but my dignity remained intact. I cast my eyes towards the cameras on my phone, their tiny green lights flickering in the darkness. Everything was prepared. All I had to do was wait. As the night prolonged, this wait evolved into a contented anticipation, like the tranquility before a storm one knows is imminent. They had provoked me excessively, and now they were about to experience what happens when I retaliate. I had spent hours by the window, my coffee in the mug now cold, when I finally spotted its headlights piercing the dark. It was 2 a.m., the street almost silent apart from Rick's truck moving closer. My pulse quickened, not due to fear, but rather anticipation, perhaps even exhilaration. After spending the entire day with Cal in setting up a trap, it was time to see if our efforts paid off. I leaned forward, squinting through the camouflage, as the colossal vehicle trundled down the cul-de-sac. Rick was far from subtle. He swerved wide, just like usual, aiming directly for my yard. I held my breath as the front tires crossed the designated line, landing on the spot where I'd hidden the mat. Suddenly, crackle filled the air, a sharp, faint sound yet distinctively audible, and the truck jerked violently, as if striking an unseen barrier. Rick's voice pierced the stillness of the night, a shrill yelp that contrasted sharply with his usual bravado. Before he could comprehend the situation, the sprinklers activated. I had positioned them strategically, and now they blasted freezing water straight at his vehicle, seeping through the open windows. I could hear him swearing, loud and panicked, as the icy blast hit him. Followed by an unsettling roar, Cal's speaker emitted an infernal noise. The profound, guttural growl reverberated around the houses, suggesting a beast had emerged from the underworld. Louder than anticipated, it shook my windows, causing Rick's truck to swerve violently, its tires spinning on the wet earth. He was yelling indistinctly, likely cursing vigorously, and I couldn't help but smile. The turmoil was captivating. Mud was flung everywhere as he attempted to flee, the truck sliding uncontrollably like a frightened beast. Then I noticed activity at their house. Clarissa appeared on the porch, wrapped in a robe, her disheveled hair. Likely alerted by the noise, she believed Rick needed assistance. She took 2 steps off the porch, barefoot, only to fall herself, zapped. She let out a wild, piercing scream, jumping around as if struck by live electricity. "Rick, what on earth is this?" she shouted, her voice cracking as the sprinklers activated, drenching her from head to toe. Unable to remain indoors any longer, I retrieved my coat, donned my boots, and exited onto the porch, feigning a tranquil demeanor as if simply checking on a disturbance outside. The spectacle before me surpassed my expectations. Rick was partially extricated from his truck, ensnared in mud up to his thigh, water streaming off his closely cropped hair, his attire clinging to his torso. Clarissa was drenched and disheveled, clutching her robe tightly, visibly shuddering while glaring at everything as if it had wronged her personally. The uproar had subsided, the music timer had elapsed, but the sprinklers persisted, spraying icy water intermittently. I folded my arms and supported myself against the railing, allowing a moment of quiet to pass before speaking. "Issues?" I inquired casually, as if merely a curious neighbor. Rick swiftly turned his head, his face flushed with anger, yet remained silent for a while, engrossed in attempting to free his boot from the mire. However, Clarissa did not falter. She immediately responded. She marched towards me, momentarily losing balance on the damp grass, jabbing a wet finger in my face with accusation. "What's this about, Marcus? This is outrageous. We're reporting this to the police." I remained unfazed. I'd been anticipating that threat and was prepared. "Go ahead," I said, holding her gaze. "I have security footage showing you two damaging my property for weeks. The cops might find it interesting." That stunned her. Her mouth gaped open, then closed, and I could see the wheels turning behind her furious eyes. Eventually, Rick managed to extricate himself from the mud and lumbered over, his clenched fist suggesting he wanted a fight. "Think you're clever, do you?" he snarled, still dripping from head to toe. "Setting up some petty trap? You're pathetic." I nonchalantly shrugged, not moving an inch. "I think it's quite shrewd, actually. Key, you should consider staying on your own side of the street next time." He inched closer, puffing out his chest, but Clarissa grabbed him by the arm. "Rick, hold back," she hissed, her voice low but biting. "He's not worth it." Drenched, her robe stuck to her, and for once, she didn't seem self-satisfied. They both stared at me, glaring, and I just returned the gaze, feeling something unfamiliar control. The cameras were recording, the plan had succeeded, and for the first time since they moved in, I wasn't the one on the defensive. Rick mumbled a curse under his breath, then turned to his truck, stomping on the mud as if it had wronged him. Clarissa gave me one last venomous glance before departing, her slippers squelching with each step. "This isn't over," she called, but there was doubt in her voice. I watched them leave, their vehicle struggling back to their driveway, leaving a path of water and defeat behind. I stayed on the porch for a while longer, letting the evening breeze calm me down, the sprinklers finally ceasing their spray behind me. The yard was once more disorderly, with mud and tire tracks. However, it didn't matter. Tonight, the garden wasn't the concern. Instead, it was about demonstrating that I wouldn't surrender anymore. I retreated indoors, secured the door, and scrutinized the camera footage on my phone. There it was, evident as broad daylight, Rick arriving, the match shocking him, the sprinklers drenching him, along with Clarissa's little dance upon triggering the trap. I saved every moment, every second, and reclined in my chair. If they wished to call the police, I'd welcome the opportunity to see them attempt an explanation. For now, though, I had prevailed. Not the entire war, perhaps, but this skirmish. That one belonged to me. I put down the phone, prepared a new cup of coffee, and enjoyed its flavor in the stillness. The night was far from over, and so was the battle, but for the first time in weeks, I felt as if I held the upper hand. Bring it on again. I'd be ready. The following day found me feeling less burdened than I had in weeks, the image of Rick and Clarissa tangled in my snare persisting in my thoughts. I had slept soundly, the kind of sleep one finds after delivering a well-aimed blow, even if it wasn't physical. The sun was barely peeking over the rooftops as I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, ready to confront the muddy chaos from the previous night. However, it was there, obvious tire tracks and puddles, but something else piqued my interest. Rick's truck was awkwardly parked in their driveway, still bearing traces of dirt, and I could see him through their front window, moving restlessly back and forth, like a caged beast. Clarissa was nowhere to be seen. Likely she was still seething in her damp robe. A smirk played on my lips. They had threatened to contact the authorities, but the street was silent, devoid of sirens or flashing lights. For now, they appeared to have retreated. My enjoyment couldn't last long, though. By noon, a car had parked in front of my house. A slim, black sedan often associated with lawyers or debt collectors pulled up. A man in an economical suit emerged, carrying a clipboard, and strode towards my walkway. I intercepted him before he could knock on the door. "Are you Marcus Shaw?" he inquired, his voice monotonous. "Yes, I am," I replied, maintaining a casual tone. He offered me a document, which looked official with numerous legal jargon typed across it. "This is a cease and desist order," he said, "from Richard Dalton. Due to your use of hazardous equipment on your property, he claims you're harassing him. You have 24 hours to remove them, or he'll file charges." I took the document, scanning the words, noting trespass, liability, damages. Rick's name was scrawled at the bottom in a large, messy signature. I almost chuckled. "Thank you," I said, and he nodded, departed without another word. I closed the door and reread it, my earlier good mood dissipating. Harassment, dangerous devices, it seems absurd. That was Rick, it seemed, who'd been using my yard as his impromptu racetrack. I threw the letter on the table and dialed up last night's video footage. There he was, Rick driving onto my property, the electric gate shocking him, the sprinklers dousing him. Trespassing, unmistakably. If anyone had a claim, it was me. I wasn't backing down. I'd stand firm against any provocation. Yet, I knew this wasn't over. Rick didn't appear the kind to be deterred by a mere shock and some water, and Clarissa was too obstinate to let me have the final say. I anticipated they'd nurse their injuries for a day or two, then retaliate again. And indeed, it happened, but not as I had anticipated. It began subtly that night. I was out front, clearing the mud from the previous night, when something seemed amiss. 2 ketchup packets, resembling those from fast food restaurants, were adhered to one of my garden gnomes, leaving red smears on its miniature hat. I scowled, removed them, and discarded them in the bin, assuming a child had carelessly dropped them. The following morning, I discovered 3 empty beer cans lodged within the remnants of my flower beds, reeking of old alcohol. I stood there, hands on hips, scrutinizing them. This wasn't random. Kids do not surreptitiously place cans in such a manner. I inspected the security cameras, but found only vague movements in the dark, too distant to discern a face. Intuition told me it was Rick, although he wouldn't risk driving through again after last night. Yet, this petty act could be his doing. Matters escalated over the subsequent days. One evening, I returned home from the hardware store to find litter spread across my lawn: banana peels, coffee grounds, various wrappers, as if someone had dumped the contents of a trash bag and fled. The following morning, I ventured outdoors and retched. A heap of soiled cat litter had been deposited by my front steps. The odor assaulted me violently, bitter and sharp, necessitating a shovel to clear it into a bag before I could even reach the mailbox. Upon reviewing the cameras again, no concrete evidence emerged, merely a fleeting motion at the edge of the picture. This unidentified individual was evidently aware of the blind spots, causing my blood to boil. It appeared that Rick was monitoring the situation, strategizing ways to circumvent my security system. I envisioned him chuckling about it, Clarissa encouraging him with her smirk, convinced they'd discovered a new method to irritate me. Indeed, I wasn't mistaken in my assumption of their malevolence. Each time I spotted Rick, he would glare at me from across the street, his jaw rigid, his broad shoulders hunched as if containing himself. Clarissa maintained her distance, but I occasionally caught sight of her on their porch, staring menacingly at my house with icy eyes, sipping her drink as if conspiring. They no longer taunted me openly, but their subtle retaliation was more damaging. It was underhanded, malicious, and left me doubting my small triumph the previous night. I had embarrassed them, true, but now they were striking back in ways that I couldn't substantiate. I spent countless hours cleaning up after them, removing ketchup from my garden gnomes, carting garbage to the curb, and each time, a fire in my chest reignited. The cease and desist letter on my table mocked me too, Rick feigning victimhood while transforming my yard into his dumping ground. That night, I sat down with another coffee, gazing at the dark street, my thoughts swirling. The trap had succeeded once, but it wasn't enough. They had circumvented it, and I couldn't just stand by and accept it. I needed to apprehend them decisively, capture indisputable evidence that would expose their actions. Something the cameras couldn't miss, something that would stick, something they couldn't wriggle out of. Without knowing the specifics yet, as I observed their house with its intermittent lights through the drapes, one fact became undeniably clear. Further troubles were imminent. They weren't finished with me, nor was I with them. This had turned into a game, and I intended to master it. I felt like a captive in my own home, constantly tense, anticipating the next heap of rubbish or spiteful remark from Rick and Clarissa. The cat litter incident had been the breaking point. Cleaning that foul-smelling mess from my porch made me realize I couldn't merely continue to tidy up after them. I needed indisputable evidence, a tangible item to confront them with and bring this to an end forever. I'd been reviewing the cameras daily, but they were too clever, operating in the dark corners, striking where the lenses couldn't see. I had underestimated Rick. He was more than just a boisterous truck owner. He was crafty in his own malicious way. One night, with coffee in hand, I was gazing out onto the dark street when I noticed a fleeting motion near the edge of my yard, not a vehicle this time, but a swift, silent figure skulking through the shadows. My heart began to race. I hastily grabbed my phone and activated the camera feed, scrutinizing the grainy image. It was him, Rick. I couldn't make out his face distinctly enough to provide evidence, but I recognized that large silhouette, the way he moved as if he held dominion over the place. He drew nearer, a sack hanging from his shoulder, and my stomach churned. This time it wasn't just trash he was discarding, but something more sinister. I remained motionless, barely breathing, trying to let him believe I was either asleep or absent. He halted by the remnants of my flower beds, bent down, and started dispersing something from the sack. It wasn't waste. It was white, gritty, reflecting moonlight salt. An entire bag of it, carelessly emptied into the earth. My fists clenched so tightly that my knuckles ached. He wasn't merely jesting with me. He was contaminating the soil, ensuring that nothing would ever flourish there again. My garden was already ruined, but this was him spitting on embers, trying to eradicate any hope I had of reviving it. He worked swiftly, spreading it generously, then stood up, brushed off his hands, and crept back into the shadows towards his house. I remained there, quivering with anger, watching him vanish. He believed he'd escaped unscathed. He was mistaken. I immediately accessed the camera footage, rewinding to the point where he came into view. There, it was unmistakable this time. The camera by the garage had captured him squarely, his face illuminated by a streetlight as he approached with that sack. Rick Dalton, reveling in his smugness, tainted my soil like some malicious cartoon antagonist. I saved the clip, my hands shaking, not out of fear, but from the exhilaration of finally having him. This wasn't simply petty destruction anymore. It was deliberate, premeditated damage to property. I didn't hesitate at all. I swiftly picked up my phone and called the local police department, my voice calm despite the rapid heartbeat. When the dispatcher answered, I identified myself as Marcus Shaw from Elm Street and explained that I had footage of my neighbor trespassing and damaging my property by scattering salt across my yard to destroy the soil. I urgently requested immediate assistance. Within about 20 minutes, a police cruiser pulled up, lights off, calmly parking in front of my house. Two officers emerged, a young man with a buzz cut and an older woman with a nonchalant expression. Upon their arrival, I greeted them at the door, phone in hand. "Thank you for coming," I said succinctly. "I've got it all recorded." The officers accompanied me inside, and I played the video showing Rick sneaking in, pouring salt, then swiftly departing. The older cop raised an eyebrow and commented, "That's quite obvious." "Do you recognize this individual?" I asked. Yes, replied I. Rick Dalton, who lives 3 houses down from me. For several weeks, his truck has been damaging my yard. I have additional video evidence if required. She agreed it was sufficient for now. Let's go talk to him, she said. I remained on the porch, watching as they walked down the street with their flashlights bobbing in the dark. Rick's truck was parked in their driveway, and a light came on inside as the police knocked. The door opened, revealing him, initially looking irritated, but then recognizing the uniforms. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I saw his arms moving frantically, likely trying to bluff his way out of trouble. The younger officer stepped forward, calm yet firm, causing Rick to slump. Clarissa emerged behind him, looking worried, gripping her robe again. She began shouting, her voice carrying across the silent street. "This is absurd. You're destroying our family over some dirt." I stood there, folded arms, allowing it all to wash over me. The officers remained unfazed, continuing their conversation for a short while longer. Subsequently, Rick moved outside with his hands tucked behind him. The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed, and my chest felt slightly lighter. They guided him towards the cruiser. Rick kept his gaze averted, while Clarissa wailed after them like a banshee. Upon returning, the elder officer addressed me while the other placed Rick in the vehicle. "We're taking him into custody for trespassing and property damage," she said. "The video evidence is indisputable. Would you like to press charges?" I responded without hesitation. "Absolutely," she nodded subtly, as if anticipating my response. "We will require you to visit the station tomorrow with the footage," she added. "For now, he'll spend the night in a cell." I thanked her, and they departed. Rick's form appeared dejected within the vehicle. Clarissa remained on her porch, watching their departure, then fixed her burning gaze upon me from afar. In response, I nonchalantly shrugged, just enough for her to see it. "You should have thought about that before damaging my garden," I called out, making sure she heard me clearly. She remained silent, instead spinning and slamming her door shut. I retreated indoors, securing the premises, and settled into my chair, my veins still humming with adrenaline. The yard lay barren and lifeless due to the salt, but that was inconsequential tonight. I had captured them, and for now I held the advantage, a feeling of satisfaction washing over me. The following morning, I awoke to a silent neighborhood, a tranquility that seemed too perfect after the chaos. Rick had been arrested the previous evening, and I assumed Clarissa was still reeling from the events. Stepping outside with my coffee, anticipating a sense of victory, the sight of my damaged yard dampened my spirits slightly. Despite the win, the damage inflicted remained. However, I refused to let it overshadow my moment of triumph. I took a sip of coffee and observed their home, pondering how quickly Rick would secure his release from jail. Not much time passed before I noticed his truck reappear in their driveway, moving slower than normal, as if to avoid attention. He exited, lowering his gaze, and vanished inside without acknowledging me. A minute later, Clarissa emerged onto the porch, pacing restlessly while holding her phone close to her ear. Though I couldn't hear her words, her animated gestures suggested she was enraged, likely speaking to a lawyer or friend about the unfairness of the situation. The neighborhood became abuzz after that. I overheard Mrs. Henley, our neighbor, glancing at me from behind her fence while watering her plants. "Heard the police were here last night," she commented, her voice inquisitive but not pushy. "Yes," I replied briefly, capturing him destroying my yard on camera. She nodded, a subtle smile playing on her lips. "Good for you, Marcus." It seemed that everyone agreed that man had been a nuisance since his arrival. As I walked past, other neighbors began nodding or waving at me, suggesting I'd done something they'd all been too polite to attempt earlier. It gave me a sense of companionship, but it was brief. At about 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a piercing, crackling noise outside. Groggy, I went to the window and saw my trash can by the curb ablaze with an orange glow against the night. My heart sank. Grabbing my phone, I dashed out in just boxers and a t-shirt, feeling the cold air nip at me as I retrieved the garden hose from the porch. The fire wasn't extensive, primarily paper and leaves, but the smell of burning plastic filled me as I doused it. By the time I extinguished the flames, the can was half melted, leaving a charred mesh to drip onto the pavement. Standing there, with a dripping hose in hand, I breathed heavily, my bare feet soaking from the wet grass. This wasn't an accident. Someone had lit it. It didn't take a genius to figure out who. Looked at their house, lifeless and hushed, no hint of activity, yet I was certain. Rick could have been nursing his wounds, but Clarissa. She was a distinct type of crazy, the kind that never ceased. I trudged back indoors, wet and trembling, and reviewed the CCTV footage. A knot formed in my stomach as I played a hooded figure, nimble and cautious, stealthily approaching the trash can with a lighter in hand. The camera angle was wrong, her face concealed, but I identified her silhouette, the way she maneuvered. Clarissa, she managed to stay beyond the camera's view, avoiding the spots where they could catch her on tape. Clever, too clever. I sat there, fixed on the screen, my rage simmering steadily. She had overstepped this time. Arson wasn't a joke, wasn't mere littering. It was dangerous, and I couldn't ignore it. However, the footage alone wasn't enough. The police would label it circumstantial, and she'd wriggle out of it with her smug grin. I required more, ironclad evidence, but I didn't know how to acquire it. For the subsequent day, I focused on clearing up the chaos, moving the wrecked canister to the garage, my thoughts whirling. Rick avoided visibility, likely instructed to stay low following his arrest, but Clarissa was omnipresent, patrolling her porch, glaring at me whenever I emerged outside, her gaze piercing like knives. Neighbors maintained a distance now, murmuring amongst themselves, and the unease seeped up the street. This wasn't settled, not by any means. Each night I meticulously scrutinized the cameras, adjusting their perspectives, hoping to detect her if she attempted it again. I even reactivated the sprinklers, just in case Rick grew brave, but it was Clarissa who kept me on edge now. She had become unhinged, wilder than ever during our divorce proceedings. I had embarrassed her cherished Rick, and she had no intention of forgiving that. Sleep evaded me, my heart leaping at each sound, my coffee growing cold as I sat by the window, observing, anticipating. Prepared for a prolonged confrontation, I was certain she would falter, and I would be there to capitalize. But suddenly, unexpected assistance arrived. It was around dusk when I heard a knock on my door. Upon opening it, Brielle Knox, the adolescent girl from the neighboring houses, stood there with her hands in her pockets. Known for her quiet demeanor and constant tinkering with her drone, our interactions had been limited to casual greetings. "Hello, Mr. Shaw," she said, shifting uneasily. "I seems I've witnessed your trash can incident, and I know the culprit." This took me aback. "Explain yourself." She looked away, then back at me. "I have drone footage. Caught her setting fire to it. Clarissa, she vandalized my pet's kennel last week, and I've been keeping an eye on her since. I've had enough of her misdeeds." My jaw fell open in surprise. "You possess video evidence?" She nodded, retrieving her phone. "As clear as a daybreak image. Would you like to see it?" My grin broadened, wider than it had been in weeks. "Brielle, you've just become my preferred neighbor." She slightly smirked, and I realized immediately this was the moment I had been anticipating. Clarissa was exposed. Standing on my porch, I was still processing Brielle's visit, my mind whirling with what she had shown me. On her phone, she displayed drone footage, initially blurry, but then zooming in, crystal clear under daylight. There was Clarissa, furtively exiting her house, a lighter flickering in her hand as she bent over my trash bin. The flames ignited swiftly, and she scurried back, glancing around nervously like a skittish cat before fading into the darkness. Brielle had recorded every second, her drone hovering silently above the street. "I thought you'd find this useful," she remarked, her voice edged with her own resentment. "She has been rude to everyone, not just you." I merely nodded, barely able to speak, and she instantly transferred the file to me. "Thank you, Brielle," I replied, and she nonchalantly departed with hands lodged in her pockets. Yet it was much more than an insignificant gesture. It encapsulated everything. Retreating indoors, I secured the door and initiated the video on my laptop, repeatedly scrutinizing it. My hands no longer quivered, replaced instead by a tranquil conviction. This wasn't akin to the ambiguous camera footage of Rick, shrouded in fuzziness. This was her unquestionable visage, her motions, leaving no room for argument. I had evidence that she transgressed an irreversible boundary, and it was now her obligation to face the consequences. I digitally archived the video onto a USB drive, donned my coat, and ventured to the police station later in the day. The same elderly officer from Rick's arrest was present, her name tag read Officer Grant. Upon my entrance, she glanced up from her desk, arching an eyebrow. "Returning so soon, Mr. Shaw?" she queried, relaxing in her seat. "Indeed," I replied, displaying the drive. "That seems to be different." She placed my trash bin ablaze the other night, and I recorded the incident. She examined the video on her computer after downloading it, maintaining silence all along. As the video ended, she emitted a low whistle, followed by, "That's her." She scribbled something on a notepad. "Where did you obtain this?" I answered. "A neighbor's child with a drone." She smiled subtly. "Indeed fortunate. This evidence is strong. We will apprehend her today." A sense of relief washed over me, allowing me to breathe freely again. "Thank you," I said, and she dismissed me. "Just doing my job. Will you be pressing charges as well?" "Definitely," I replied confidently. She looked at me, a mix of respect and amusement in her eyes, and instructed me to return home, assuring me they would handle it. By late afternoon, I found myself back on my porch with a cup of coffee when the police car pulled up to their house. From afar, I observed nonchalantly, as if simply savoring the day. Officers Grant and the younger one from earlier approached the door, which Clarissa answered, still in her robe, her hair disheveled. I couldn't decipher what they were saying, but her gestures grew frantic, her voice piercingly loud. "This is absurd. You can't do this," she exclaimed, loudly enough for me to catch it. Grant remained composed, responding indistinctly, and then the younger officer advanced, cuffs in hand. Clarissa halted, her mouth agape, before attempting to retreat inside. They prevented her. Grant gripped her arm firmly yet gently and rotated her around. The cuffs locked into place, prompting another outburst from Clarissa, a barrage of curses and entreaties that reverberated down the street. Rick then appeared, rushing out, his face flushed, fists balled up. "What in the world is happening?" he bellowed, charging towards the officers. Tensing up, I anticipated a confrontation, but the junior officer swiftly intervened, obstructing Rick's advance. "Retreat, sir," he barked, his tone firm. Rick ignored him, instead thrusting an arm towards me, gesturing across the street. "Isn't that you, you little brat?" he roared. I remained motionless, sipping my coffee, returning his glare. The officers seized him, twisting his arm back, and Rick stumbled, cursing as they restrained him. Clarissa continued to scream, her voice cracking now, as they escorted her to the patrol car. "He's lying, it's all lies," she wailed, but her words sounded feeble, pleading. The neighbors had emerged now, Mrs. Henley on her lawn, a few others peeking through windows, and I could feel their gaze upon me, upon them. Grant forced Clarissa into the back seat, slamming the door, while the junior officer held Rick down until he ceased struggling. "Stay here," he instructed Rick, then joined Grant in the car. They departed, Clarissa's suppressed screams echoing away, leaving Rick breathless, fixed on me with a gaze intense enough to incinerate my home. I placed my mug aside and approached the edge of my porch, hands tucked away. Rick advanced towards me, his knuckles clenched once more, but he paused, possibly recalling the police weren't far off. "You're doomed for this," he snarled menacingly. "Perhaps," I replied indifferently, "but she ignited the fire, not me. You should have kept her tethered." His face contorted, and for a brief moment, I thought he would charge nonetheless, but instead, he spit on the ground and strode back inside angrily, slamming the door so violently that the windows shook. I remained there for a while longer, the street tranquil once more, the burden settling in. Clarissa had vanished, apprehended, imprisoned, and Rick was trapped, powerless for once. I'd accomplished it. Not merely a shock or a warning this time, I'd struck them where it hurt. Returned indoors, secured the place, and slumped in my chair as adrenaline morphed into a softer feeling. The garden remained a chaotic mess, the trash can a pooled lump, but such details held little importance at that moment. I had reclaimed control bit by bit, and they could no longer ridicule me. The conflict wasn't over. Rick's hostile gaze indicated as much. But for tonight, I emerged victorious, and that was sufficient. Awake the next morning, the street seemed altered, hushed, weighty, as though the very air was pausing to breathe. Clarissa was absent, jailed on arson allegations, and Rick was left nursing his injuries. Stepping out with my coffee, I anticipated a sense of triumph, but what greeted me was a mix of sweetness and sorrow. The barren soil confronted me, a lifeless stretch where my garden once bloomed, and the burden of it all refused to lift. I had won a skirmish indeed, but the war left wounds that could not be overlooked. I savored my coffee while observing their residence, curtains tightly shut, no hint of activity within. Rick's truck remained in the driveway, carrying residual mud from the night I'd shocked him, prompting me to ponder his silent reaction. I anticipated it wouldn't last long. He wasn't one to ignore a matter, especially since Clarissa was imprisoned due to my actions. The neighborhood had undergone changes too. Mrs. Henley smiled at me from her garden with an extra touch of warmth, and some neighbors cast furtive glances in my direction, either nodding or quickly looking away. The news of Rick's arrest, Clarissa's breakdown, and the whole unfortunate sequence of events had swiftly circulated. I wasn't certain if they viewed me as a hero or simply as an instigator, but it made no difference. They no longer stared at me as though I was the cause of all troubles, which was progress. I spent the day occupied, clearing the final remnants of the trash and chaos, fine-tuning the cameras for precaution, but my thoughts kept wandering back to Clarissa in her cell, Rick brooding across the street. She would be released at some point, either on bail or probation, and then what? Weeks drifted by, heavy with tension. One afternoon, Clarissa returned in a cab, her home being the destination. I observed from my window as she alighted, her countenance stern and unyielding, without her robe this time. Merely jeans and a coat adorned her hair neatly tied back. She didn't acknowledge me, simply entered, and the door echoed with its forceful closure. Rick emerged moments later, head bowed, and I spotted the sheriff's deputy parked nearby, presumably upholding the restraining order I'd established post-fire. He was legally barred from approaching my abode now, providing me a modicum of respite. Yet, the silence emanating from their house wasn't tranquility, it was a simmering tempest that I could sense in my marrow. They scarcely ventured out after that. No porch drinks, no boisterous truck engines, merely a frigid, acrid hush that blanketed the cul-de-sac like fog. However, one night, it erupted. Under the streetlight, I retrieved the mail when I heard purposeful footsteps approaching. It was Rick, striding angrily across the road, his face contorted with a malevolent expression. My stomach tightened, but I maintained my composure, keeping my hands in my pockets and adopting a casual demeanor. He halted a few feet away, just beyond the boundary set by the restraining order, his knuckles clenched so tightly that veins bulged visibly. "Are you content now?" he snarled, his voice deep and gruff. "You're the one who wrecked us, you arrogant bastard." I gazed at him, his closely cropped hair reflecting light, his eyes wild, and a hint of sympathy flickered within me, but not enough to sway me. "I didn't cause any damage," I replied calmly. "You two were the ones responsible. Damaging my property, salting my garden, starting fires, that's on you." He advanced cautiously, testing his boundaries, and I stiffened, prepared to dial the police if he overstepped. "You think you're so smart," he sneered, "putting her in jail and ruining everything. On account of you, we've become a spectacle on this street," I nonchalantly replied, my gaze fixed on him. "Perhaps you ought to have considered that before disrupting my existence. This isn't my doing, it's Rick." He seemed poised to erupt with anger, but then there was an interruption, a voice, crisp and youthful, piercing through the darkness. "Leave him be." I turned, startled, to see Aiden, Clarice's 14-year-old son from her first marriage, emerging from their driveway. Our interactions with him had been minimal since they moved in. He was a quiet lad who preferred solitude and often found himself engrossed in his phone or playing soccer in their backyard. He strode towards us, his slender body taut, his face flushed. Rick wheeled on Aiden, enraged. "Retreat indoors, brat," he barked, but Aiden refused to comply. "No," he declared, his voice quivering yet steady. "You're the one who told her to do it. Mother claimed it was your idea, the arson, everything. I've had enough of this." I stood there, amazed, as Rick's face fell, as if all the air had been sucked out of him. "What on earth are you implying?" he snarled, yet Aiden remained resolute. "She told me last night. You goaded her into tormenting him, as revenge." "I heard it." Rick advanced towards him, his hand poised to grab him, but Aiden recoiled, looking at me instead. "I'm sorry, Mr. Shaw," he said, his voice faltering. "Initially, I thought the truck prank was just a joke, but it turned out otherwise. I didn't realize things would escalate this much. I didn't know what to say, my throat tightened, taken aback by this boy standing there, confessing everything." "It's all right, Aiden," I replied. "It takes courage to admit that." He nodded swiftly and awkwardly, then returned to the house, leaving Rick there, motionless. Rick stood still for a while, his fists relaxing, his shoulders sagging. He looked at me, a sense of defeat in his eyes, then mumbled, "This isn't over," and trudged back across the street. This time, it didn't seem like a threat, but more like a beaten man. He departed, the door slamming shut behind him, and I stood there in silence, contemplating. Aiden's voice reverberated within me. Rick had abused her, and now their own child was rebelling against them. Their standing was tarnished, their family fractured, and amazingly, I hadn't needed to act this time. I glanced back inside, secured the premises, and settled down with my coffee, enveloped by the night. It wasn't jubilation I felt, more akin to relief, blended with an odd discomfort I couldn't define. They were crumbling, and I had contributed to their demise. That was enough for the moment. The morning that followed seemed lighter than any since Clarissa and Rick moved in. The sun shone brightly, casting long shadows across the street, and their house remained quiet, no truck roaring, no porch patrolling, just silence. Stepping out with my coffee, the air crisp with the nip of early autumn, I gazed at my yard. The salt-stained patch remained unchanged, an unsightly blemish where my garden once flourished, yet it caused less pain today. Word had spread through our neighborhood, mostly from Mrs. Henley's hushed chatter, that Clarissa and Rick were leaving. A for sale sign was erected a week after Aiden's outburst, and by the end of summer, they had vanished. No tearful farewell, no last stand, just a moving truck one night and an empty house in the morning. I stood there, sipping my coffee, gazing at the vacant windows opposite me, and felt something within me find rest. Not triumph, but more like a peaceful serenity I hadn't experienced in months. Days rolled into weeks, then months, and our cul-de-sac began to mend. Neighbors emerged more frequently, Mrs. Henley tended her garden, Brielle flew her drone about. Even the reclusive couple down the street started planting their own flowers. My yard remained barren for a while due to the salt preventing growth, but I showed no haste. Evenings found me on my porch, coffee and grip, as the street resumed its ordinary rhythm. I scarcely caught tidbits regarding Clarissa and Rick post their departure. Merely whispers of their relocation to a flat somewhere else in town, their disputes persisting, their bitterness intact. My interest wasn't sufficient to probe further. Their presence was absent from my life, and that was the essence. But then, on a cool autumn morning, there came a gentle yet persistent knock at my door. I paused, my mug forgotten, and opened to find Aiden standing there, clutching a small potted plant. He seemed altered, perhaps taller or merely less stooped, his dark hair disheveled beneath a baseball cap. "Hello, Mr. Shaw," he said, shifting uneasily, his voice subdued but resolute. "I brought this for your garden." I was taken aback and accepted the pot, a little marigold with vibrant yellow blossoms contrasting the greenery. "Thank you," I replied, placing it on the porch railing. "You weren't obligated to do that." He nonchalantly shrugged, nudging the step with his sneaker. "I chose to. Improved now, different location. Mother remains angry, but less irrational than before, a fact I wished you to acknowledge. I didn't want you to presume we were all as chaotic." Looking at him, the boy who confronted Rick that night, I felt an unexpected warmth. "It takes courage to admit that, Aiden. I said sincerely. I'm grateful. He nodded quickly and uncomfortably, then muttered a farewell before departing down the street, his hands tucked away in his pockets. I stood there for a moment, cradling the plant, and then it struck me. For months, I'd been battling, laying traps, pursuing evidence. Hell, I'd turned my yard into a war zone just to make them cease. But this wasn't about retribution. It was about starting anew. I brought the marigold inside, fetched a shovel, and began work. The salted spot remained barren, but I dug around it, preparing a fresh area near the porch where the soil was untouched. I planted Aiden's gift there, smoothing the earth over it, feeling the soil beneath my fingers again. Initially, I had merely a solitary plant, yet it was the commencement. Gradually, I augmented it with more daisies, tulips, even some discounted rose bushes from the hardware store. Neighbors took notice. Mrs. Henley offered me cuttings from her garden, and Brielle frequently visited with her scruffy dog Rusty to assess my progress. "Looks great, Mr. Shaw," she'd remark, her drone humming above, and I would acknowledge, wiping sweat from my brow. The garden grew sporadically, bit by bit, and so did the street. Each evening, I sat out there, coffee steaming in the cool air, observing the flowers capture the final rays of sunlight. The tire tracks vanished, the damaged fence was rebuilt, stronger this time, and the salt-stained area started to soften, giving way to grass where nothing had ever sprouted before. It wasn't as it used to be after everything that happened, but it belonged to me once more, and that sufficed. Brielle frequently dropped by, her pet often sprawled across my lawn while she shared stories of school or her newest drone feats. "I recorded a raccoon last night," she'd announce, grinning, and I'd chuckle, feeling lighter than I had in years. Mrs. Henley occasionally summoned me for tea, and I'd comply, enjoying her tales about her grandchildren as tranquility enveloped something familiar. One evening, under the golden and red leaves, I perched on my porch, my mug comfortingly warm, gazing at the garden. Although not flawless, with some plants spindly and others small, it was thriving, consistently and confidently. My mind wandered to Clarissa and Rick, recalling the turmoil they instigated, the restless nights spent filled with anger and insomnia. I'd waged a battle to halt the madness, and I'd triumphed, not through violence or shouting, but through patience, through evidence, through unexpected support from individuals like Brielle and Aiden. No longer did I harbor animosity towards them, for they had vanished, leaving me intact, my humble abode tranquil, lawn undisturbed. I savored a gulp of coffee, its bitterness comforting, and exhaled deeply. The conflict was settled, and the blossoms returned. Occasionally, I grasped, it's not about retaliation. It's merely reclaiming what's rightfully yours and releasing the rest.